Good afternoon, everyone. It's very, very nice to be here once again with my friends at ASSAL. I've joined your group many times over the years, and now I am in a different capacity working with the NAIC on international regulatory matters. So I do look forward to spending time with you in the years to come. What I would like to do is take time now to talk about the valuation system we use in the United States. I want to give you some background and specifics on how we comply with ICP 14 in our accounting standards and statutory accounting principles in the United States. So the first point is really three topics that I want to cover today. The key regulatory tool, regardless of which system you utilize, IFRS, market value adjustments, GAAP plus, is financial reporting. This is absolutely key for the regulators to get the information that they need to know and understand the financial condition of the companies that they regulate. I also want to talk a little bit today on ICP 14 and how the U.S. system complies with ICP 14 standards and requirements. And then finally, very briefly touch on the International Capital Standard and the position of the United States that a flexible standard and the use of a GAAP plus adjustments valuation methodology is appropriate. So if we can, I just want to cover those things very quickly to give you all a time to digest the information. The first, as I mentioned, is financial reporting. This is absolutely key to any system of regulation. It's the cornerstone, and the purpose being policyholder protection. So you look at the reporting requirements and you want to see some authenticity in the reporting, that it's the same information, that it's reliable for all. In the United States, we use statutory financial reports. There's very, very detailed public information. So again, the regulator can understand the financial condition of the company. The reporting forms, the schedules for all the reporting across the United States are the same. The data is collected and it's reconciled to US GAAP. There's a lot of public information available to interested parties, stakeholders, as well as to regulators. And the subject matter is all subject to an independent audit. So we can ensure the consistency between the companies and the materials and the information that's being reported. And this is one of the reasons that reconciliation to US GAAP is why the US favors a GAAP plus adjustments methodology in consideration for the ICS, the International Capital Standards. So everyone in the US uses the NAIC Accounting Practices and Procedures Manual. This is primary that it regulates the insured's state by state accordance with state laws. These regulations, policies, and procedures are codified in state law in each of the 50 states in the jurisdiction. The emphasis obviously is on solvency, it's policyholder protection, and making sure that the company can not only meet the obligations to policyholders, but meet the legal obligations that they have. So we want to make sure that they are maintaining the capital and surplus that is required by state law. It's with a sufficient margin, obviously, for safety. So what do we use? This is the Bible, if you will, of our accounting practices and procedures. So a little bit about the information contained in these volumes. First of all, it's used in all 50 states. And they are created through an NAIC open and transparent process. Many of you have attended NAIC meetings over the years and very familiar with our working group, task force, and committee structures. And so any development of these policies and procedures are made with the participation of state regulators across the country. In particular, we have 39 members across the states, and these are the experts. These are the financial regulators in individual states that get together at the meetings and throughout the year to discuss these policy practices and procedures They then bring recommended changes to the task force, which then goes to the Financial Committee at the NAIC, and then to the Executive Committee at the NAIC. So it's a long-term process that we adopt and develop these practices and procedures. And it's a transparent and open process that sets those accounting standards for the U.S. Okay, so what are in those standards? I think the three key elements for any system of valuation is conservatism, consistency, and recognition. And those three elements are highlighted in the preamble of our Practices and Procedures Manual, and I suspect they run throughout the globe when it comes to insurance regulation. Is the methodology, is the valuation reasonably conservative so that it will remain constant throughout economic cycles? You want to prevent fluctuations in surplus. That's key. Consistency. You need meaningful, comparable financial information. So again, so that everyone, all the regulators, not nowadays across the globe, can determine the financial condition of the insurers. So it's the consistent application of those statutory accounting principles that gives us that resolve and that confidence that they are being consistently applied. Finally, recognition is the third and final theme throughout the accounting practices and procedures, and that's how we look at assets. How are they recognized? There's very stringent criteria on which assets can go onto the balance sheets. Only assets with economic value are applicable to fulfill policyholder obligations. The liabilities are recognized as they're incurred, and the revenue is recognized only when the earnings process is completed. And I'll get into that a little bit more specifically. But my assurance here is just clear to confirm that these processes and procedures, complex as they may be, and we don't have the time to go into the specific details, but these are key principles of our methodology for valuation that comport with ICP 14 requirements. It's looking at the U.S. valuations of assets and liabilities. As in any system, you have to look at the nature of the assets held for fair value, as we discussed earlier, those other assets that are amortized cost measurement, subject to amortized cost measurement, and these are held to maturity assets or loans. There are specific parameters, specific requirements in our policies and procedures that provide risk adjustments to these assets so that they are very carefully evaluated for impairment. So it's a matter of looking at the nature of the assets and making certain that they are properly recorded, evaluated under our system. Again, reliable, quality information, consistently applied, that is transparent. We use some of the principles from U.S. GAAP. We look and incorporate FASB principles as to the extent that they don't conflict with our statutory accounting principles. So this slide will give you the key principles in how we evaluate liabilities, technical provisions. The assets on one side, the liabilities on the other. The U.S. system provides for margins on current estimates. That is a given in our system. If you look at one side, on the life side of the equation, the system provides for asset adequacy testing. Our standard valuation law that is applicable in all the jurisdictions in the United States is used to determine the technical provisions, and they are subject to that asset adequacy testing. On the life side, on the P&C side, there's no discount for the short-term reserves. You just use the ultimate settlement values, and the margins are implicit in the discount rate. So again, it's the U.S. standard valuation law subject to asset adequacy testing mechanisms. So key principles, time value of money. These are principles necessary and standard laid out in ICP 14. I think the three of them here on this slide are the critical ones to point to, and whether your valuation system complies with that. In the U.S., it does. We account for the time value of money. The supervisor established criteria for the determination and discounting of technical provisions, and allowance for embedded options and guarantees. Additional detail for the U.S. valuation is in the NAIC model regulation and actuarial opinion and memorandum regulation. So we do take into account the special circumstances for specific embedded options and guarantees. But pretty much it's for life side, it's the standard valuation law that establishes the reserves for technical provisions subject to that testing that I mentioned. And then on P&C side, there's no discount for the short duration reserves, except for a couple of things like workers' comp or long-term disability where there's a longer time involved. They may have a discount recognition of the time value of money in those instances. So on the big picture, if we will, and many of you have attended these meetings, both NAIC and our current dialogue with our colleagues in Europe to discuss the ICS issues. And we step back for a moment. I just want to touch upon the evaluation methodologies being discussed at the IAIS, whether it be a market value adjustment versus a gap plus adjustment. Obviously, in the United States, we support a U.S. gap plus adjustment approach. If many of you at the IAIS meetings in February, there was a statement put out by the executive committee, which I'd like to read and make a point of. It was a statement that reads as follows, quote, "The ultimate goal of a single ICS will include a common methodology by which one ICS achieves comparable, i.e. substantially the same, outcomes across jurisdictions. Ongoing work is intended to lead to improved convergence over time on the key elements of the ICS toward the ultimate goal. Not prejudicing the substance, the key elements include valuation, capital resources, and capital requirements." This is a very, very important statement that the IAS came out with and was agreed upon in February. And notice how valuation is one of the key elements. Now, in the U.S. culture and our system, we have a strong preference for the U.S. GAAP methodology for reconciling our SAP, our statutory accounting procedures, to U.S. GAAP. There's a strong expectation in the U.S. for both from the public, from investors, from rating agencies, and regulators of transparency and mapping the SAP valuation results to U.S. GAAP. And that's why we believe that that is one methodology that should be considered. And in fact, it is being considered. There's field testing ongoing now on the market value adjustment and GAAP Plus. So we are very interested and very much involved in that work that's going on at the IAIS. And so there are two approaches here. We feel in the U.S. that the GAAP Plus adjustments there's a lot of good reasons for that. We believe it's cheaper, it's simpler, and it doesn't require the use of sophisticated modeling techniques, and as opposed to market value, which may have some subjective elements to it. So that's my pitch for GAAP Plus adjustment. I'm sure Carlos will give us another point of view as far as MAV is concerned. But there's good reasons for both. I mean, the United States is one of the largest jurisdictions in the world, and this is how we do business, and there's a cultural, regulatory bend towards relying on the system that we have relied on for many, many years. But we look forward to the results on the field testing and in development of the ICS process, and we're working very closely with our colleagues around the globe in that regard. So I know I've gone through this rather quickly in the interest of time in our presentations, and I want to be sure Carlos has enough time to make his pitch as well. But the key on the ICS development is flexibility. Let's take the time, let's evaluate the process, and look at the results of the field testing, work together on reaching what is to be an ultimate goal that I think everybody wants. It's just the means as to how we get there. We can rely on such elements of supervisory colleges, which have just grown exponentially since I started back in 2003. And that's a very, very important piece to this regulatory collaboration and cooperation. So with that, I will turn the microphone to Carlos so we be sure to have enough time for questions. Thank you all very much.